On with our application, we were able to add in a search bar. We were able to search by title. So now we'll go ahead and, before we implement searching by the search scope, before we implement searching by title or abstract, we'll go ahead and segue to a next view, right? We'll segue to a detail view to show the abstract of that news headline. Because the news headline has an abstract which is a bit longer than the title. We'll show what that looks like. And then we'll come back and we'll work on the scope titles, right? So what does our view look like? Small rendering here. We have this is the detail view controller. So we're dragging a detail view controller, a new view controller. The nav title will be the title of the headline. We'll have an image view. The image view will be pinned 0 to the lead-in, 0 to the trailing, and 0 to the top. And 0 to the top, right? And the height of it is going to be 35% of the height of the device. Everybody with me? And the abstract will be a text view. The text view will pin it 0. Let's see. Start off with the byline first. So the byline will be the bottom. The byline will be, for example, let's pin it 0 to the bottom, 8 to the edge here, 8 to the bottom, right? And then we'll have our text view being pinned to the bottom or the top of the byline. We'll have our text view pinned to the trailing and pinned to the lead-in. Okay, this is the view we're going for. Let's go ahead and do that. So we'll add in, go to our storyboard, drag in a view controller, here. Great. Position that right here. And we'll control drag from our cell over to our view controller. So make sure that you select your cell. Make sure it's a cell that's selected. Control drag from the cell over to our new view controller, and it's going to be a show segue. A show segue pushes a new view onto the navigation stack, right? Last week we saw modal presentation, and before that we saw show segues before. So show segues pushes a new view. You also get the back button. With a modal presentation, you do not get the back button. Okay, modal slides up. A show segue pushes from left to right. We did show segue, yes. All right, so cool. What else do we have here? If we look at our view here, we have an image view. So go ahead and drag in an image view, pin it to the top of the bottom of pin the top to the bottom of the nav bar, pin the lead-in to the lead-in of the super view, and pin the trail-in to the trail-in of the super view. And you want the height of it to be proportionally about 35% of the height of the super view. Okay, so this is the layout here. Let's go ahead and set it up. So I'll get an image view, drag my image view over. It's going to be pinned to the top, pinned to the trailing, and we said it is going to be about 35%. So for my image view, I'll click on Add New Constraints. I'll say 0 to top, 0 lead-in, 0 trailing, add 3 constraints. For my fourth constraint, for the height, I will control drag from my image view to my super view and say equal heights. Say equal heights. And I'll go ahead and I'll edit my equal heights value. So I click on my image view, I go to the size inspector, and where it says proportional height here, I'll edit it to about 35%. We'll see what that looks like. We could always come back and tweak it a little bit. So 35%, 0.35. That's a multiplier. Multiplier 0.35 of the entire view, the height of the view. Make sure to press enter. This looks fairly okay here. For my image view, I'll add in some placeholder placeholder image, I will say photo. For the placeholder image, I'll type in photo.fill here. Okay. Next, I want to go ahead and get a text view. So our text view will go right below our image view. So let's go ahead and drag in a text view. Okay. Before we do our text view, let's do our last label. Let's do the byline label here first. Let's do the byline at the bottom, and then we'll constrain the bottom of our text view with the top of the byline. So let's get a label. Get in a label here, put it right at the bottom here. I'll simply put in, oh, look at that, I'm an author. Authors can spell the name. Okay, so this is the byline. Well, by. And let's go ahead and set up the constraints for this. So add new constraints for my label, my byline label. I'll say 20 to the lead-in, 0 to the bottom, and that's enough. Two constraints. 20 to the leading edge, 0 to the bottom, or make it 8 rather. 8. The label is 20 to the lead-in and 8 to the bottom. Oh no, I haven't done the text view yet. So let's go ahead and add those two constraints for the label. And now let's go to the text view. So let's go ahead and drag the text view such that it's right at the top of my label using the guidelines. And now let's set up the constraints. Add 4 constraints for it. Do not add the top yet, because the top here, it's assuming we want to go to the top of the super view. So let's go ahead and add the 3 constraints first. So we'll add lead-in is 20. Bottom is 8 to our label, and trailing is 20. So 3 constraints. Great. So now what we'll do, we'll control drag from our text view over. That's why it was a bit probably off. It wasn't seeing what we were doing. Make sure that your text view doesn't overlap. My text view was overlapping my image view. That's why it was assuming the closest neighbor is the super view. Everybody? So as you drag in your views, even if they're not constrained yet, be careful to where the closest neighbor is. In that instance, the closest neighbor for the top of the text view wasn't no longer the image view, because the image view was above it. Everybody with me? So make sure that we are somewhere guesstimating where our thing should be before we do the constraints. So now let's go back and, actually we could just control drag. Control drag from my text view up to my image view. And we'll say vertical spacing. So add in vertical spacing. Vertical spacing is how much spacing does it have vertically between the image view and the top of my text view. At this point, we could edit it if we want. So I could click. One thing we could, one second. One thing I want to show us, you could edit, you could click on a particular constraint and edit that constraint. So right here, we want to click on the top constraint. We're able to click on any constraint we want and show the size inspector. Everybody with me? So here I want to edit the top constraint. I could click on it. I could click on the I-beam. As I click on the I-beam, I get access to my attributes inspector, and it shows me the constant. It's 30. So we'll change that constant from 30 to 20. Julia, were you able to get it? Click on the top constraint, the one that's between the top of the text view, right, that I-beam, click on it. It might be a bit harder to click on it because it's very tiny. Command Z and drag your image view drag your image view lower than the bottom of your, drag your text view lower than the bottom of your image view. And then control drag from your text view to your image view and select vertical spacing. So we said 20, right? Press enter. And this is the view we have. So for now, we're pretty much where we want it to be with our design, right? So we have our image view, we have our text view, we have our byline, and our title will be set up in the navbar, right? Great. Go ahead and set up your prepare for Segue. Set up the class while I go ahead and see what Magia's computer is doing. Set up your class. We need to create a new class, correct? To manage this scene. So create a new class, call it News Detail View Controller. Or News Detail Controller is probably simpler here. Create a new class, call it News Detail Controller. And start working on the prepare for Segue. Because what do we need to pass? What object are we passing from our top stories over to our detail view? What object are we passing? What does all that become? What's that object? A headline, right? So we're not passing individual properties, we're passing in a headline. Okay? On Friday, I saw some people passing in like separate properties. The only thing we needed to pass in was a crayon. We have an array of crayons, we just pass a crayon. The crayon has everything we need. So here, a news headline has everything we need. That's the object we pass from A to B. Cool? Cool. So coming back here, we said we needed to create a new class to manage our new scene. So I'll command N. I'll go ahead and create a CocoaTouch class. I'll click on next, and I said, what's the subclass of it? UI View Controller, right? So UI View Controller, and we said we called it News Detail Controller. So News Detail Controller, click Next, click Create, and here we have our class. So get rid of our boilerplate code. Great. So what does our detail controller have? It has some outlets. One of those outlets is an image view. So here we'll call it headline image. Headline image view is of type UI image view. We have a headline abstract. Label is of type UI label. We have a byline. Oh, it's a text view, thank you. UI text view, thank you, sir. Next up, we have the byline. So headline, just call it byline. Label is a UI label. That's it. 3 elements, right? Image view, text view, and label. Great. We'll set up a function here. We'll call it update UI. Update UI will be called in our viewDidLoad. Update UI here. I want to stop here and tell us about outlets. I saw some people attempting to set an outlet in their Prepare for Segue. In your Prepare for Segue, in the view controller, before that view controller, the outlets are all nil. Why are they nil? They're not on screen. Everybody with me? The outlet is not on screen when you're in Prepare for Segue. In Prepare for Segue, you could set an object, like I could have my object here. I could call it news headline. It's a news headline. I could set that object in my Prepare for Segue. That's fine. But I cannot set an outlet, right? The outlet is not on screen. So when you run your application, if you try to set an outlet from your Prepare for Segue, it's going to crash. That outlet needs to be on screen in order for it to have a value, okay? So be careful there setting outlets in Prepare for Segue. It's not possible. Okay, so here, let's keep going. So here we have our outlet, we have our guard to protect against or to unwrap our optional. I'll simply call it headline. Is a news headline. Else, here we want to crash the app. As opposed to what we did earlier with the search. As opposed to what we did earlier with the search where it was empty. If it's empty, we don't want to crash the app. But if we get here and we don't have a headline, something went wrong in our Prepare for Segue. And that's a developer error. We need to fix that. So that's why we intentionally crashed the app using the fatal error here. So check news headline is nil. Verify Prepare for Segue. If everything else went great, that means we got to line 28, right? We got a headline, we're in line 28. So at this point, we'll come back to the image later. So I'll put a to-do here. Set up image processing using URL session. And dispatch queue that main that async. So we'll come back and do the image processing. But now we could set up our abstract label. We could actually set up many more other things. We could set up our title. So the title of the headline here, we'll set the navigation title to it. So here we have headline.title. Next we have the abstract. We have headline abstract label dot text equal to headline, that's you, dot abstract. And next we have byline. So headline byline dot text equal to headline dot byline. While we're still coding, I'll bring up the storyboard and I'll bring up the assistant editor. Yeah, definitely. 1 second. Where were we? Oh, that's not the function. 1 second, 1 second. Before I go back to the code, let's set up the class first and we'll come back to it. So let's set up the class and we'll come back to the code. So for the class, we have our second detail controller, or our detail controller. Click on the controller bar, the second one. Click on the control bar where it says view controller. Go to identity inspector. What's the class that we created? News detail. Make sure to press enter. So we entered news detail controller. Make sure to press enter. It needs to be part of the module. If we do not do that, the app will crash. Make sure to press enter here. and make sure that your check gets activated. And at this point, we could simply toggle between our previous view controller and our current view controller, and we should see the code. Right? It would be great if Xcode, the minute we change the class, for it to update the system editor, but it doesn't always work, or it never really works. So you want to click outside that scene, come back to the scene, and it should populate. So ideally, at this case, we should have our detail controller right next to our new class. You guys wanted me to scroll down here? Like right here? Okay, so now we could see all the code. Go ahead and connect your outlets by dragging your outlets over. So I'll drag my image view to my image view. I will drag my abstract label to my abstract text view. Why did I do this? Wait one second, sorry. Let's just rename this. It's not a label. Not a label. Headline abstract text view.
You don't refactor also
930. Ah, yes, I need to refactor, right? You see that? The instructor is not listening to your things. The preacher, practice what you preach, sir. Okay, so abstract text view here. Go ahead and drag it to my text view. And my byline is a label. I'll drag it down to my byline. So at this point, we have connected everything. But we're still missing the crucial part. What are we missing, Andy? What are we missing so far? Well, minus the image. What are we missing? Prepare for Segue, right? Cassandra, that's what you were saying, right? So we're missing prepare for Segue, guys, right? Assessment doesn't mean that's the end of it, right? We keep looking at more prepare for segues as we go along. We'll see different ways to segue, like programmatically, but know that this is not all. You have to go to your prepare for segue, and where's the prepare for segue? Where do we set it up, Margiet? Do we set it up in the detail controller, or do we set it up in the newsfeed controller? Prepare for segue. In the newsfeed controller, exactly. So we'll go, everybody done with the detail controller here, the code? So we'll go back to our, let's navigate back to our newsfeed controller to set up our segue. So newsfeed controller, let's set up our segue here. That's a good place to start writing code. After filter headline is good, but it's more like a view did load early thing happening here, so I will put it, that's fine, I'll put it where you said. So prepare for segue. We start typing in prepare for segue. It's an override method. Why is it an override method? It overrides from the parent controller, or the parent class rather. The parent class being UI view controller. So prepare for segue inherits, or prepare for segue is a class from, not a class, a method from our parent class. This is why we have override here. So let's keep going. What's the first thing we need to do? In prepare for segue, what am I doing? Yes, Tiffany. I need to get the destination, right? So get destination view controller. How do we do that in code? Okay, so we have an instance, and what do we use to go ahead and get that actual instance? Because the instance, we can't get it exactly from segue, that destination. What do we have to do?
Is it guard-led?
It's guard-led, but what do we, why isn't it optional? What action are we doing on the segue, that destination? What's that called? What's the terminology? Right, so we downcast it, right? Those are the terminologies you need for that interview there, right? So we need to downcast it to the type we expect. And it's an optional, that's why we use a guard-let. Hello. So here we have guard, let. In our case, we will call it use detail controller. And the way we access our destination controller, we use it via the segue argument here. So segue argument has a destination property on it. And here is where we typecast it to the type we expect. The type we expect is called news detail controller. And here we have an else with our guard. And here is where we want to crash the app. Again, that's a developer error. It crashed because the object we expect did not work as expected. So we need to fix it. So here we'll say could not retrieve an instance of our detail controller. If all went well, which it should, right? Many things could go wrong here. At this point, maybe you forgot the class. Maybe you forgot to set up the class name in Interface Builder. So we could give ourselves even a better statement here. I could say verify class name in the identity inspector. What's that?
You changed what you had before?
Yeah. When it crashes here, we want to get as much information as we can. So giving the fiddle error a better message is better for you. Everybody? Cool. So here we say verify class name in identity inspector. Right? So if we do crash there, we need to go verify that. Right? Cool. If everything went well, oh, we're missing one crucial part here. Get the destination view controller. What else do we need? The index path, right? Because how do we know what news headline the user selected? So one, we need to get the destination controller. Two, we need the index path the user selected from the table view. Right? We need that. So let's go ahead and set that up. So right after my news controller, I'll put a comma. I'll put a comma right after my news detail controller. I'll press enter. And I'll say let index path, which is also an optional from my table view property. My table view has a property called index path for selected row. Index path for selected row, an index path identifying the row and section of the selected row, exactly as the property spells out, right? So here we have the index path. Great, so we have the two pieces of information we need. What's the next thing we need to do? May?
Yes. So you do use detail controller dot headline.
So you're saying use detail controllers. News detail controller instance dot headline, right? Equal to
The headlines.
equal to the headlines. Anybody else want to help May? May's almost there. Yes.
Is it news detail controller is equal to headlines dot index path?
Well, not dot index path. Remember, it's an array.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Headlines, the open bracket index.
Open square bracket, right?
Open square bracket.
Right. So, but we'll break up the code a little bit here to make it easier for us to understand as we keep going. So for number 3, we'll just say get the selected headline. And to get the selected headline, we'll create a variable here, headline, equal to our headlines array. Using array subscript, we'll say index path dot row. So now we have a headline. We'll simply just pass the headline over here. So this is number 4. Set the news headline. What's your question?
Why did you set it as a variable? Just to like put it.
Just to break it up, because I don't want to lose us too quickly. Yes, you could just do index path right on that, right? But what does that actually do for you? It gets you an object.
Okay.
Right?
So, like just to illustrate it.
Yes, exactly.
should I do it? Should it be done like that?
Feel free to just do index5.row. That's fine. Okay? Let's go to the right, let's go to debug. Okay? All right, cool. So at this point, we've set up everything correctly. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. Especially like I try to do it as we're learning because we know what we need to get. I need to get an object, right? So number 3 is that crucial part there, getting you the object using the index path. And number 4 is where you're actually setting the destination object using the current object that you got. So at this point, let's run our app. I think we have enough information to get our detail getting populated with the UI based on what the user selects. So if I go down, let's see what headlines we have here. We work. So here we have our information being currently rendered. We could do a bit better, right? Our abstract is a bit small there, so we could change the font size on it, right? But we have all our detailed information getting passed over. Minus the image, we'll come to the image later. But here we have the byline, who wrote the story. We have the abstract, what's the actual story about, like an abstract of it. Cool? So let's just update the size of the font a little bit on our text view. So let's go back to storyboard. And let's see what the default font size is here. And go to Attribute Inspector. And it's 14. So we could increase that a little bit. Yes, we could use dynamic font here. But now let's just increase it to, say, 20, 24. I click on any news headline. This is better, it's bigger, I could read. I scroll down, more headlines, Google stuff. It doesn't scroll because there's nothing to scroll. Everybody with me? Right? It's a text view, it scrolls if there's more content. In that case, there's no more content, there's no need to scroll. Great. Was everybody able to segue correctly and see your details of your news headlines? Jahid?
Yes.
Oscar? Yes, sir.
I have an error, I'm not sure why.
What does the error say?
It says undeclared type view is detail view control, but I did change my class type. So
Undo it and redo it again, the class name.
yeah.
It might be Xcode did not commit the change when you clicked on return. So go back to empty it out, like delete the class name, press enter, so it goes back to UI view controller. Exit out of the identity inspector and go back again inside and change it. All right, so let's keep going here. Great. We're able to segue over. Let's go ahead and talk about search scopes now. The last topic of searching will be search scopes. What does that look like? Any questions before we move on? You what? It's segued and it didn't show the information, or it's segued and what's the error? You may have connected the wrong element to your view controller. It sounds like that's what you did. Is there a connection from, did you connect from your cell? Like, where's that error exactly coming from? When you click on the segue button, when you click on the cell? Say that again. Go back to it, you said? Oh, sorry. The code you mean? Oh, okay. News detail controller.
Now my storyboard isn't loading. I can't close out that story. I can't really quit. I can't do it.
Okay. Let's go ahead and set up our search bar title scopes. So for now, we'll just use two scopes, right? The user will be able to search by title, or they'll be able to search by abstract, okay? This is where we'll end with searching, right? Let's go back to our storyboard. So go to the storyboard. Let's click on our search bar. Click on our search bar. Go down to where, do you see where it says scope titles? Do you see scope titles? We could actually increase the amount of scope titles. They're very similar to a segmented control, right? So we could increase that number to 2 by clicking on the add button twice, right? We do get the same name, but we'll change that. So the first one is valid because we'll search by title, but the second one is not valid. So you could click on it once, click on it again, and now it enables us to edit. So the second option, let me go back. No problem. So click on search bar. Click on search bar, attributes inspector comes up, right? We go to our attributes inspector, I zoom in here. I go down to where it says scope titles. Do we see that? And increase it to 2. Because we'll deal with 2 scope titles. The first one is title. The second one, click on it once, it highlights. Click on it a second time, it enables you to edit. So here we want to say abstract and press enter. Next thing we want to say, do we see where it says capabilities? Do we see capabilities right at the top? I want to say show scope bar. So click on that. Click on shows scope bar. Right? There's a lot of things you could modify with the search bar, as we saw. Right? There's a lot of things you could modify here. So this is what we're after right now. At this point, we have our UI set up with scopes. We have, it defaults by title. If the user switches over to abstract, we want them to search by abstract. Everybody with me? Okay. Let's go ahead and run it and just make sure that we do have our search scopes showing. They won't work yet. There's nothing that we've done yet. We haven't done any code for it yet. But here, if we click on abstract, it switches over. Again, it's very similar to our UI segmented control. And this is also an updated UI, right? Apple just updated this. Before it wasn't as modern looking. This now looks more streamlined and cleaner as a design element here. Cool. Let's keep going. Let's go to code. So we've set up the UI. Let's go to the code. We do have our search. Go back to your newsfeed controller. In your newsfeed controller, go down to the extension that conforms to UISearchBarDelegate. So you want to go back to the extension that conforms to UISearchBarDelegate. Let's go back to our search bar delegate here and see what methods we have. So managing the search text, we have that should begin editing. That's not what we're after. We're after anything that says scope in it. Selected scope, that looks like what we want. Responding to scope button changes. So this is the method we're after on our UI search delegate. Everybody? This method responds when the user clicks on any of those search scope titles, this function gets called. So any code we have to do, as far as like knowing what to search by, this is the method we need to start figuring out what the user selected. Okay? So let's actually go ahead and implement this one. It's called selected scope. So we'll go back to our code. Right below our search bar text change, we'll type in selected scope. So type in selected scope, press enter, and let's test out our function like we did before. So here I'll print, what do we have? We have the search bar, which is great, but that's not exactly what will help us here. What helps us here is that selected scope argument. It's an integer, which implies that it has indexes, right? Most likely it's going to be 0 and 1. Right? We like to start counting from 0. We're computer nerds. So let's see what that looks like. So here I'll say selected scope and see how it changes. So here selected scope is selected scope. I'll go ahead and run the app. Well, very similar to segmented control, we have a selected index, right? This int here implies some index, like what tag or what view got selected. It's represented by an integer, right? So let's test it out. So currently we're on title. If we click on abstract, look at that. Selected scope is 1. Do we have that? I go back to title. It should be what? 0. And it is 0. So this works, right? So we have the starting point of our code. We have where we want to know what the user selected. That part of it we have. Great. Any questions before we move on? Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and set up. Let's go to the very top of our code here. Yes?
Can you get 1 second? I'll space you.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. We'll set up an enum because enums is one of the best ways to know what state your program is in. We'll set up an enum. We'll call that enum search scope. Search scope will have 2 states. Either it's a title or it's abstract. Everybody with me? Enums are great for knowing what state your application is in. We want to know what state the application is in at any time when we're searching. So we'll go ahead and we'll create an enum for that. So go back right below import UI kit here, I'll create an enum. I will call it search scope. Again, our enums very similar to our objects. They're singular, right? So it's not search scopes. Even if it has multiple cases, it's search scope, right? And my case, I will have a title and I will have abstract. Abstract, a summary of the headline, and title of headline.
We need to add an enum. Is it ideal to just add it to that?
In that particular case, it works here. I mean, you can break it up and have its own file, but it only implies with that particular news controller. So you could have it at the top here in this particular instance. But if it applies to the entire app, I would remove it and have it in its own file. Cool? But it depends. It's on a use case basis as to where you put it. Okay, cool. So one thing we want to keep state of, we want to keep state of what is the current scope. What scope am I currently in? So we'll create a variable for that. We have our IB outlets here. We have our variables here. I'll create a variable here. I will call it current scope. Right? Current scope starts with the title. So I default it to the title. So scope, search scope title dot title. Default value is 0. This is the title scope.
Now does it make sense to open a raw value of an int to
We have a for this particular one. Not exactly. We're just changing the cases here. But yes, you could do a raw value if you want to map it exactly with the indices. Yes, sir.
Can I see the enum real quick?
The enum is here.
Thank you.
We have our current scope declared. We need to refactor a little bit, but that's okay. I'll put a to do right here while you guys type in. To do create a variable called search query that updates filter method or calls filter method. We'll come back to that. Everybody finished typing out the enum? Almost?
I'm getting an
The
error.
2 lines.
Well,
It's called search query dot what?
search query dot search query. Oh yeah, we'll come back to that one. Where's your error coming from?
It says, for the var current scope, it says extensions must not contain stored properties.
Oh, you're in an extension. You shouldn't be in an extension. Yeah, yeah, which is true. An extension cannot have a stored property. Like this particular line here, you cannot put it in an extension, which you are doing. Yes. So make sure you write beneath your headlines variable. Cool? All right, let's go down to our search scoped function and write code. We haven't written any code here. Code to do things. What are we doing? All right. The one thing we're interested in here is the selected scope. We'll use a switch statement to switch on it. So based on the scope, we'll set up what the current, based on the selected scope here, case 0, we only have 2 scopes for now. And what else do we need? Is that it for the switch statement? We need a default, exactly, sir.
I thought we did it with enums, and I might like have missed.
Only when it's finite,
Is it not?
right? Integer is not finite, right? If you have an enum of 4 cases where you have north, south, east, west, that's finite. You only have 4 options.
If the switch was on the enum instead of the scope.
Okay.
And then here you have default. Let's do print statement here, not a valid, not a valid search scope.
But
Uh-huh.
do you ever touch the default if the only way to touch it is with the buttons?
Yes, but you have to write a default in that case, right? Our switch statement in that particular case is not finite because we say 0, we say 1, right? We have to just have a default to finish the switch statement. Going back to unit 1, right?
No,
It's
I
not
understand
finite.
that, but I'm just saying the default.
In reality, yes, it doesn't, right? Cool. So here we have our break. What are we doing here? I want to say current scope equal to current scope equal to search scope dot title, or we could simply say dot title. And here we want to update the current scope to be abstract. So all what we're doing is updating the current scope that we are searching for as the user toggles between the searches. All right. How are we doing? Still typing?
Oh, and then we have to give the variable the filter functions, and then we have to like filter through the titles.
Yes, we have to do a bit of refactoring to make it all work, because before it was only working with title, but now it has to know, based on what the user selected, what am I searching by, or what am I filtering by.
Oh, so when it's on the title, then it will just keep the same function that we've already put on, but when it switches over to.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes, sir.
So is this enum implementation, is this like for clearness? Because couldn't we hypothetically like do the referencing instead of like setting as current scope to something? Couldn't we be checking the index, like to see if it was a title or an abstract?
Yeah, you could have done that, but the
Okay.
enum is cleaner and there's no, it's error proof at that point, because you're not hard coding anything.
Okay.
And if we have more searches later, we can just add in an extra enum case.
Sounds good.
Cool. All right, so let's go up to our to-do and execute our to-do here. Our to-do is for our search query, because we also need to refactor what that looks like. So for the search query, we'll create a search query variable. Search query, we'll assign it to empty, and our search query will update it to have a property observer, and this is where we checked to see what is my current scope. Okay, so on this particular did set, I will switch on my current scope, case title, we'll write logic, and case abstract, we'll write next logic. And that's also cleaner here, Matt, right? So as we update the search query in the text did change, this gets called and it does the filtering for us. So let's do the filtering for the first guy. What do we have here? We have headlines. What do we have? Headlines, what is the data called? We have top stories, right? What's the top stories now? Headlines data. Headlines data dot get headlines dot filter. Okay, and what are we filtering by? If it's a title, we're filtering by title here. That was load data. We're refactoring right now because our function just does one. We could use our function and pass in some title, whatever, but we might not use our function anymore because right now we have different search algorithms going on. So we'll do them separately. So here we'll say search by title, but yes, we could refactor it and have a function taking the text, like our load data. Okay, so title here, I will say title dot lowercase that contains our search query. Dot lowercase. Can't spell anymore. So this takes care of the searching for a title. We search by title, most important part here. If the user changes to title, we search by title. And the same code we do for abstract here, except that we're not doing title anymore, but we're searching by abstract. So as I said, we have to refactor our search algorithm code later, but for now, this is our search query. So every time we update our search query's text, this set gets called based on the current scope. Is it a title search or is it an abstract search? Our filter gets filtered accordingly. If it's a title search, we search by title, or we filter by title. If it's an abstract search, we filter by abstract, right? And again, we could write a simple utility function for that. Take out that to do here. Create a variable called search query filters. Could just take that out. Not the search bar. What are we using? The search text this change.
We'll make search text equal to
Search query. Yeah, search query equal to search. Exactly. 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 That's the last part of it. Very good. Are we still typing? I'm hearing clickety-clack. So we're still typing. Can we move on? Okay, let's keep going. So here, where are we? Search, this is this. So instead of calling load data here, no, load data is fine. This is good. Load data is fine for now. But our filter headlines function, that's the one I don't think we use anymore. Yeah, so we're not going to use filter headlines anymore. This is the refactoring part of it. Feel free to refactor as you need. So here we have our search query variable, and we pass it search text. Right, so no longer are we using the filter headlines. We're simply using the search query, and the search query, every time it gets updated, based on what the scope is, if it's title or if it's filter, if it's title or if it's abstract, it does the search query for us.
Okay. So we can take out the filter headlines for search text.
Yes. We'll clean up the code when we're done. That's all part of programming, right? Our first search was just basically working with the title. Then we said we want to have more search criteria in. So we want to have a title, we want to search by title, we want to search by abstract. So we refactored our code, and in the refactoring process, whatever functions becomes redundant, you get rid of it. But let's verify our code does work before we go ahead and delete stuff. So go ahead and run your app. Run the application. Does our search still work for title? So let's see. We have Mac. So Mac still works. If I backspace here, that's fine. What's one of the abstracts we have here? We have battle. Let's see. If I change to abstract here, and I put in battle, right? Battle works because that's the one abstract that has battle in it, right? There's battle in there. Where is it? Right here, battle. Right, so that also works. So our title works, our abstract works, okay? Based on what the user toggles, the search algorithm works based on what the user selected. Yes, you could have other search criteria as well, right? You could use machine learning and search by image. No, not right now. Any questions about searching? Yes? So we could fix that. Anything else that's broken here, we could fix. So if we go all the way back here, that brings up all the searches. I click search here. It doesn't empty out. My empty out doesn't remove my searches. That still works. Okay? So we're able to see search bar as far as like getting us up and ready for doing any search on our. You could go back to your Game of Thrones and put search bar on it. Or better yet, create your own application over the holiday and put search in there. Mr. Guitar Guy, where are you? He's going to create like a list of guitars from some API, right? I want to search by acoustic guitars. It only shows me acoustic guitars. I want to search by artist that uses acoustic guitars. And I get artists. Well, let's keep it MVP. Cool. So we could implement searching into whatever we have, because searching is great, right? You have like anytime you exceed over whatever the screen shows, really, you start want to have search there. You want to have the user be able to search for items, right? And we saw what searching looks like. Yes?
Okay, so and in this case, for each string, we don't have to do no reload data or anything like that. It just automatically.
It happens because everything is tied in, right? So if we go back to the code here, so when the search query gets updated, right? Well, when the search query gets updated, what gets called? Did set, correct?
Yeah.
In did set, one of those two things happens. Either I'm searching by the title. In that case, if I am, what happens to my headlines?
Headlines is being called.
It's right, and what happens in headlines?
In headlines, we reload data.
Right? Right? So very good. So it all ties in to itself, right? So did set again is very powerful here. right? One variable changes, it does some other action on a different variable, our table view reloads, and we're all happy. Cool? Great. So any other questions? Any other questions? Going once, going twice. So, to the highest bidder. Thank you.